Welcome to my channel. I am Professor Morrison. The whisper you hear in the dark is not the wind. It is the language the past has chosen to speak with you. From which city and at what time are you watching us? Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like so you don't get lost in the darkness. Now, the story begins. Get ready. The rusted key beneath Blackthorn House. I never believed in cursed objects until I found the key. 3 months ago, I moved into a small rented house in northern England, just outside a village called Blackthorn Hill. The place was cheap, isolated, and constantly cold, no matter how high I turned the heating on. The landlord barely spoke to me during the handover. He only said one strange thing before leaving. If you hear knocking upstairs after midnight, ignore it. At the time, I laughed. I stopped laughing after the 4th night. The house itself was old, not charming old, rotten old. The wooden floors groaned under my feet, even when I stood still. Pipes rattled behind the walls at random hours. Sometimes I'd wake up convinced someone was walking slowly across the hallway outside my bedroom. But every time I checked, nothing. One rainy evening after work, I noticed a loose floorboard in the storage room beneath the stairs. I pried it open with a screwdriver, expecting rats or mold. Instead, I found a rusted iron key wrapped inside dirty black cloth. The second I touched it, my fingers went numb. The metal was freezing cold, far colder than it should have been. There were strange symbols carved into the handle. Symbols I'd never seen before. They almost looked burned into the iron rather than carved. That night was the first time I heard the whispering. I woke up around 2:13 a.m. to the sound of someone speaking softly near my bedroom door. At first I thought the TV downstairs had turned on by itself. But then I realized the voice was right outside, whispering my name, slowly, over and over. I couldn't understand the rest of the words. It sounded wet, distorted, like several voices speaking through one throat. I sat frozen in bed staring at the door, while the whispering continued for almost 10 minutes. Then came the scratching. Something dragged slowly across the wood from the other side. Long, deliberate, like fingernails. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but the screen was black, dead battery, even though I had charged it before sleeping. The scratching stopped suddenly. Then the whispering came from inside my room, right beside my ear. "You opened it." I spun around so fast I fell off the bed. Nobody was there, but the room smelled different. Damp, rotten, like wet earth from a graveyard. The next morning, I searched the entire house, trying to convince myself I imagined everything. But when I entered the bathroom, I nearly vomited. Written across the mirror in dripping black liquid were the words, "Return the key." I moved out that same day, or at least I tried to. The moment I packed the key into a box, strange things started happening around me. My car engine died 3 times on the empty road leaving Blackthorn Hill. Streetlights flickered off whenever I passed beneath them. And twice, I saw a tall figure standing behind trees near the roadside, watching me. It was too tall to be human. Its arms hung almost to the ground. I ended up returning to the house before sunset because the car completely failed less than a mile away. The landlord wouldn't answer my calls anymore. Neither would anyone in the village when I asked about the house. People just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. That night, the knocking upstairs finally started. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. The problem was, there was no upstairs. The house only had one floor. I heard the knocks move across the ceiling above me, following me from room to room. Dust fell from the plaster every time it moved. Then came footsteps. Massive footsteps, as if something enormous was crawling directly over my head. I locked myself inside the bedroom and pushed furniture against the door. Around midnight, all the lights in the house went out at once. Silence filled the rooms. Then I heard the bedroom door creak open behind the furniture. Something was inside with me. I couldn't see it clearly in the darkness, but I heard breathing, deep, uneven, wet. And then I saw two pale eyes near the ceiling, too high to belong to a person. The thing unfolded itself slowly from the corner of the room, joints cracking loudly like breaking bones. Its skin looked stretched tight across a body that bent the wrong way. And hanging from one of its long black fingers was the rusted key. But I had left the key downstairs. The creature tilted its head and smiled. Its mouth opened far too wide. Inside its throat, I heard dozens of people whispering at once. "You should never have touched it." The next thing I remember is waking up outside the house at sunrise, barefoot, covered in mud. The key was lying beside me. I threw it into the river 2 days later. Last week, I found it again, on my kitchen table, wet. Embo, the breathing behind the velvet curtain, the fatal nightmare in the living room of Salzburg. An eerie rhythm of heavy, wet inhalations resounded from the corner of the darkened room, cutting through the thick silence of this ancient stone villa, located in the alpine suburbs of the city of Salzburg in Austria. My name is Daniel, an architectural acoustic engineer hired by a wealthy foreign investment firm to measure the sound-dampening properties of these thick Baroque walls before the entire property undergoes a massive structural renovation next year. Recording subtle background noises and analyzing structural echoes constituted my mandatory professional routine during this night assignment. Together with my 24-year-old assistant named Claire, I was calibrating the high-frequency microphones in the center of the spacious living room when we noticed a distinct, repetitive sound coming directly from behind the heavy velvet curtains that covered the massive bay windows. A suffocating, intense heat filled the entire perimeter in a few seconds, releasing a terrible stench of sulfur that altered the gaseous balance of the room, burning our throat pathways in a violent manner. That sudden thermal anomaly proved that the room harbored the manifestation of a ruthless paranormal entity, a destructive force from the deep spiritual abyss that utilized the air currents to torment any human intruder. This stone villa in Salzburg instantly became a chamber of intense physical torment, as these invisible entities used the complete isolation of the house to inflict agonizing pain on the living before their total destruction. The cycle of physical torment began at the exact moment Claire stepped toward the corner to pull the heavy fabric aside, being suddenly lifted into the air by an irresistible magnetic pressure that erupted from behind the window pane. The surrounding air converted into a superheated vortex that prevented any defensive movement or escape, while the thick velvet curtains tore themselves into long strips that moved like whips, binding the limbs of my assistant with unprecedented aggressiveness. These invisible spiritual potencies sought prolonged agony before causing demise, squeezing Claire across the empty space to shatter her bones while creating a terrifying pressure in her ears. This invisible force executed the martyrdom of my companion with staggering cruelty, breaking her joints while the heat warped our acoustic sensors. The paranormal entity extended the suffering of the victim until her muscular structure collapsed entirely under the immense atmospheric force, directing then that entire corrosive thermal flow and invisible fury against my exact position in the middle of the room. The thermal impact generated by the vortex shattered the wooden frames of the large windows, causing the immediate collapse of heavy plaster and stone decorative pieces upon the floor without any external mechanical movement. Without manifesting a definite anthropomorphic shape, the dark presence acted through an overwhelming atmospheric compression, piercing my skin with glass splinters projected through the air under the effect of the extreme temperature. The invisible executor controlled the density of matter perfectly to keep my body conscious, while the waves of heat rose along my legs, corroding the skin tissue and paralyzando my movements. My desperate attempt to break through the main door was completely annulled by the magnetic impact. Heavy pieces of the collapsing wall fell due to the continuous paranormal activity, striking my chest with immense violence and fracturing my ribs, which pinned my broken body beneath the sharp debris of the ruined living room. An implacable suction force dragged me into the boiling core of that gaseous cloud, where the acidic vapors instantly burned my vocal cords, preventing any utterance of help or entry of oxygen into my chest. The hidden presence exerted a crushing pressure over my breastbone, forcing the definitive cessation of all my heartbeats after long minutes of terrible torment. The entire ceiling disintegrated under the power of the thermal collapse, burying our broken bodies beneath tons of compact dust and damp ashes. My awareness fades away completely on the ruined floor of this cursed environment, consumed by the fury of these entities that erased our existence in a few moments. The dense stone permanently seals the tragic memory of an investigation that ended in total oblivion. The shadows in the savannah, the fatal expedition in the wilds of Chania, the suffocating dust of the forgotten trail rose beneath our boots as the pale moon cast distorted outlines through the thorny acacia trees, illuminating the decaying perimeter of an isolated safari campsite located on the outer rural borders of Chania in Greece. My name is Arthur, a wildlife documentation specialist hired by a European research foundation to record the nocturnal migration patterns of native species before the dry season altered their movements. Calibration of acoustic gear and checking the integrity of our tents constituted my mandatory professional routine during this nocturnal field assignment. Together with my 24-year-old assistant named Helena, I was adjusting the thermal imaging cameras in the center of the camp when we noticed a strange rhythmic distortion in the hot air coming directly from the open plains. A sudden scorching heat engulfed the entire campsite in a few seconds, releasing an overwhelming stench of sulfur that radically altered the gaseous balance of the atmosphere, burning our respiratory tracts in a violent manner. That severe thermal anomaly proved that this remote research post harbored the manifestation of a ruthless paranormal entity, a destructive force from the spiritual abyss that utilized the dry winds to torment any human intruder. This isolated savanna camp near Chania instantly became a chamber of intense physical torment, as these invisible entities used our complete isolation to inflict agonizing pain on the living before their final elimination. The cycle of physical torment began at the exact moment Helena stepped forward to secure the radio mast, being suddenly hoisted into the air by an irresistible magnetic pressure that erupted from the cracked earth. The surrounding air converted into a superheated vortex that prevented any defensive movement or escape, while the thick canvas straps of our gear tore themselves away to move like whips, binding the limbs of my assistant with unprecedented aggressiveness. These invisible spiritual potencies sought prolonged agony before causing demise, squeezing Helena across the empty space to shatter her bones while creating a terrifying pressure in her chest. This invisible force executed the martyrdom of my companion with staggering cruelty, breaking her joints while the intense heat warped our expensive aluminum tripods. The paranormal entity extended the suffering of the victim until her muscular structure collapsed entirely under the immense atmospheric force, directing then that entire corrosive thermal flow and invisible fury against my exact position in the middle of the camp. The thermal impact generated by the vortex shattered the wooden support poles of our main shelter, causing the immediate collapse of heavy canvas and stone boundary markers upon the ground without any external mechanical movement. Without manifesting a definite anthropomorphic shape, the dark presence acted through an overwhelming atmospheric compression, piercing my skin with metal splinters projected through the air under the effect of the extreme temperature. The invisible executor controlled the density of matter perfectly to keep my body conscious while the waves of heat rose along my legs, corroding the skin tissue and paralyzing my movements. My desperate attempt to reach the vehicle was completely annulled by the magnetic impact. Heavy pieces of the collapsing iron frame fell due to the continuous paranormal activity, striking my chest with immense violence and fracturing my ribs, which pinned my broken body beneath the sharp debris of the ruined camp. An implacable suction force dragged me into the boiling core of that gaseous cloud, where the acidic vapors instantly burned my vocal cords, preventing any utterance of help or entry of oxygen into my chest. The hidden presence exerted a crushing pressure over my breastbone, forcing the definitive cessation of all my heartbeats after long minutes of terrible torment. The entire camp structure disintegrated under the power of the thermal collapse, burying our broken bodies beneath tons of compact dust and damp ashes. My consciousness fades away completely into the dry dirt of this cursed outpost, consumed by the fury of these entities that erased our expedition in a few moments. The scorched soil permanently absorbs the final gasps of our failed journey into the dark. The silent ritual ground. I didn't believe in rituals until I visited the site outside a small village in northern England. Locals called it the silent ground. No one explained why. They just said people stopped going there after dark. I arrived there as part of a documentary project about abandoned spiritual sites. My plan was simple: film the ruins, leave before sunset. The place was a circular clearing surrounded by stone markers, old carved stones. Some were broken, others tilted, as if pushed by something strong. The air felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Not cold, just heavier, like breathing took more effort. At first, everything seemed normal. Birds in the distance, wind moving through grass. But when I started recording, The audio picked up something I didn't hear with my ears. Whispering, very faint, almost like someone speaking underwater. I checked my surroundings. No one was there. I told myself it was wind interference and continued filming the stones. Some had symbols scratched into them. Not English, not Latin. Something older. As the sun started to set, the atmosphere changed quickly. The shadows between the stones became darker than they should have been. I noticed something strange. My camera kept focusing on empty space behind me, losing focus every few seconds. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, barely audible, circling the outside of the stone ring. I turned, but nothing was there. Still, the footsteps continued. I decided to leave, but when I reached the path, I realized something disturbing. The way back looked different. The trees were closer. The path I came from was gone. I checked my phone. No signal. Battery dropping fast. Then the whispering returned, louder this time. Not random anymore. It sounded structured, like a language trying to form words. I walked back into the stone circle without meaning to. My legs just moved. The moment I stepped inside again, the wind stopped completely. Total silence. And in that silence, I heard a voice right behind my ear. "You entered willingly." I froze, slowly turned around. No one. But one of the stones had changed. A dark mark was now visible on its surface, like something wet had appeared from inside the rock. The sky above the clearing darkened unnaturally fast. It wasn't sunset anymore. It felt like night had been dropped on top of the world. My camera started recording static images of shapes that weren't there a second before. Tall figures standing between the stones, watching me. Then I saw it. A shadow that didn't belong to anything. It stood near the center of the circle. Completely still, no face, no edges, just a dense darkness shaped like a man. The air around it vibrated slightly, like heat distortion. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy. My ears filled with a low humming sound that grew stronger every second. The shadow raised its head, and the whispering stopped instantly. Everything stopped. Even my heartbeat felt loud in my chest. Then it spoke again, not in words, but directly into my mind. "You called us here long ago." I didn't understand what that meant. I had never been here before. But then I noticed something carved into the stone beneath my feet. Fresh scratches. My name, repeated over and over. That's when I remembered something I shouldn't have forgotten. Years ago, as part of a group project online, I had joined a forum discussing rituals. We had written down names, symbols, instructions. We never thought it was real. We closed the forum, forgot about it, but apparently something listened. The shadow moved closer without walking. It simply shifted through space, appearing nearer every time I blinked. The stones around me began to hum softly, like they were alive. I heard voices now, not whispers, full sentences overlapping. "You opened the path. You marked the ground. You invited what was waiting." The ground beneath me felt unstable, like it was breathing. My camera fell, but it kept recording. I saw myself on the screen, but something was standing behind me in the footage, taller than anything human, its arms stretching unnaturally long, touching the stones around me. I didn't look back this time. I couldn't. The final thing I remember clearly is the sensation of something pressing against my back. Not touching me physically, but entering me, like cold smoke filling my lungs from the inside. Then everything cut out. I woke up hours later outside the stone circle at dawn. My equipment was gone. My clothes were covered in ash-like dust. No one believed my story. They said I must have collapsed from exhaustion, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispering, not outside anymore, but inside my own breathing. The silent celebration in the dark mansion, the agony at the birthday party in Split. The flicker of a solitary match struck against the dark wall illuminated the cold stone pillars of this isolated ballroom, while the heavy smell of burning wax filled the damp air of a medieval villa hidden in the old coastal quarters of the city of Split in Croatia. My name is Lucas, an event photographer hired by a wealthy family to capture the private celebration of a milestone family event inside this historical property before it was sold to foreign developers. Organizing the lenses and checking the light bounce across the old tapestries constituted my mandatory professional routine during this nocturnal assignment. Together with my 24-year-old assistant named Emily, I stood in the center of the grand hall where a large frosted cake sat untouched on a long wooden table, waiting for the guests who had mysteriously gone missing just before our arrival. A sudden scorching heat engulfed the entire ballroom in a few seconds, releasing an overwhelming stench of sulfur that radically altered the gaseous balance of the atmosphere, burning our respiratory tracts in a violent manner. That severe thermal anomaly proved that the celebration hall harbored the manifestation of a ruthless paranormal entity, a destructive force from the spiritual abyss that utilized the festive air to torment any human intruder. This historical mansion in Split instantly became a chamber of intense physical torment, as these invisible entities used our complete isolation to inflict agonizing pain on the living before their final elimination. The cycle of physical torment began at the exact moment Emily stepped toward the central table to look at the unlit candles being suddenly hoisted into the air by an irresistible magnetic pressure that erupted from the stone floor. The surrounding air converted into a superheated vortex that prevented any defensive movement or escape, while the decorative silk ribbons hanging from the high ceiling tore themselves away to move like whips, binding the limbs of my assistant with unprecedented aggressiveness. These invisible spiritual potencies sought prolonged agony before causing demise, stretching Emily across the empty space to shatter her bones while creating a terrifying pressure in her ears. This invisible force executed the martyrdom of my companion with staggering cruelty, breaking her joints while the intense heat melted our camera lenses and tripods. The paranormal entity extended the suffering of the victim until her muscular structure collapsed entirely under the immense atmospheric force, directing then that entire corrosive thermal flow and invisible fury against my exact position in the middle of the hall. The thermal impact generated by the vortex shattered the massive wooden doors, causing the immediate collapse of heavy plaster and stone crests upon the floor, without any external mechanical movement. Without manifesting a definite anthropomorphic shape, the dark presence acted through an overwhelming atmospheric compression, piercing my skin with glass splinters projected through the air under the effect of the extreme temperature. The invisible executor controlled the density of matter perfectly to keep my body conscious while the waves of heat rose along my legs, corroding the skin tissue and paralyzing my movements. My desperate attempt to reach the side exit was completely annulled by the magnetic impact, Heavy pieces of the collapsing stone walls fell due to the continuous paranormal activity, striking my chest with immense violence and fracturing my ribs, which pinned my broken body beneath the sharp debris of the ruined ballroom. An implacable suction force dragged me into the boiling core of that gaseous cloud, where the acidic vapors instantly burned my vocal cords, preventing any utterance of help or entry of oxygen into my chest. The hidden presence exerted a crushing pressure over my breastbone, forcing the definitive cessation of all my heartbeats after long minutes of terrible torment. The entire ceiling structure disintegrated under the power of the thermal collapse, burying our broken bodies beneath tons of compact dust and damp ashes. My consciousness fades away completely into the burning darkness of this cursed estate, consumed by the fury of these entities that erased our presence in a few moments. The ocean wind outside continues to howl through the empty ruins that guard their dark secrets in eternal silence. The distorted transmission from room 4, the final nightmare at the security monitor in Brno. The cold flickering light emanating from the central surveillance monitor cast long twitching geometric shadows across the concrete floor of the underground security hub, located deep within a sprawling commercial complex in the city of Brno, in the Czech Republic. My name is Victor, a senior systems technician hired by a private firm to audit the high-definition thermal video feeds and digital backup storage arrays before the facility underwent a total electronics overhaul. Checking structural connection nodes and logging data discrepancies constituted my mandatory professional routine during this nocturnal field assignment. Together with my 24-year-old assistant named Helena, I was calibrating the main optic server when we noticed an extreme visual anomaly manifesting directly on screen 4, which displayed an isolated subterranean storage vault. A sudden scorching heat engulfed the entire monitoring bunker in a few seconds, releasing an overwhelming stench of sulfur that radically altered the gaseous balance of the atmosphere, burning our respiratory tracts in a violent manner. That severe thermal aberration proved that the sealed complex harbored the presence of a ruthless, paranormal entity, a destructive force from the spiritual abyss that utilized the high-voltage transmission lines to torment human intruders. This underground bunker in Brno instantly became a chamber of intense physical torment, as these invisible entities used our complete isolation to inflict agonizing pain on the living before our final elimination. The cycle of physical torment began at the exact moment Helena stepped toward the main console to adjust the camera focus, being suddenly hoisted into the air by an irresistible magnetic pressure that erupted from the server racks. The surrounding air converted into a superheated vortex that prevented any defensive movement or escape, while the thick copper power cables tore themselves away from the concrete walls to move like whips, binding the limbs of my assistant with unprecedented aggressiveness. These invisible spiritual potencies sought prolonged agony before causing demise, stretching Helena across the empty space to shatter her joints while creating a terrifying pressure in her chest. This invisible force executed the martyrdom of my companion with staggering cruelty, breaking her physical points while the intense heat melted our hard drives and recording equipment. The paranormal entity extended the suffering of the victim until her muscular structure collapsed entirely under the immense atmospheric force, directing then that entire corrosive thermal flow and invisible fury against my exact position in the middle of the room. The thermal impact generated by the vortex shattered the heavy steel reinforcement frames, causing the immediate collapse of heavy ceiling tiles and metal brackets upon the floor without any external mechanical movement. Without manifesting a definite anthropomorphic shape, the dark presence acted through an overwhelming atmospheric compression, piercing my skin with glass splinters from shattered monitor screens projected through the air under the effect of the extreme temperature. The invisible executor controlled the density of matter perfectly to keep my body conscious while the waves of heat rose along my legs, corroding the skin tissue and paralyzing my movements. My desperate attempt to reach the heavy vault door was completely annulled by the magnetic impact. Heavy pieces of the collapsing concrete wall fell due to the continuous paranormal activity, striking my chest with immense violence and fracturing my ribs, which pinned my broken body beneath the sharp debris of the ruined bunker. An implacable suction force dragged me into the boiling core of that gaseous cloud, where the acidic vapors instantly burned my vocal cords, preventing any utterance of help or entry of oxygen into my chest. The hidden presence exerted a crushing pressure over my breastbone, forcing the definitive cessation of all my heartbeats after long minutes of terrible torment. The entire surveillance hub disintegrated under the power of the thermal collapse, burying our broken bodies beneath tons of compact dust and molten wires. My awareness dissolves completely within the burning ruins of this underground trap, consumed by the fury of these entities that wiped our expedition from the grid. The dead static on the destroyed screens signals the permanent end of our investigation. The breathing beneath the basement. I moved into the house in northern England during November, when the rain never seemed to stop and darkness arrived before evening. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but after my divorce, I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere empty. The landlord barely looked at me while handing over the keys. Before leaving, he only said one strange thing. "Whatever you hear from the basement, don't answer it." I laughed because I thought he was joking. The basement door was in the kitchen floor, hidden beneath an old carpet. The first night, I ignored it completely. The house itself already felt wrong enough. Pipes knocked inside the walls, floorboards creaked even when I stood still. Sometimes late at night, I heard soft footsteps moving upstairs despite being completely alone. By the third night, sleep became impossible. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I woke to a sound coming from downstairs. Breathing, slow, heavy, wet. At first I thought someone had broken into the house. I grabbed my phone and listened carefully from my bedroom doorway. The sound came from beneath the kitchen floor, the basement. I forced myself downstairs while every light in the hallway flickered weakly above me. The breathing stopped the moment I reached the kitchen. Then came scratching. Not loud, just slow nails dragging across wood beneath my feet. I stared at the basement hatch for nearly a minute before returning upstairs. I told myself it was rats. Old houses always had rats. But the next morning, the carpet covering the basement entrance had been folded neatly to one side. I knew I hadn't touched it. That night I locked the basement hatch with a heavy chain from the shed. At 2:13 a.m., the breathing returned. This time it was louder. And something else came with it. Whispering. I couldn't understand the words, but there were multiple voices speaking at once. low and strained like people talking underwater. Then came three slow knocks from beneath the floor. Knock, knock, knock. The chain suddenly rattled violently. I froze in bed while the entire kitchen shook beneath me. Plates crashed downstairs, chairs scraped across the floor. Then silence. Absolute silence. The next morning, I found the chain untouched, still locked, but the basement hatch stood slightly open. After that, things became worse every night. I began seeing shadows standing at the end of hallways before disappearing. Sometimes I woke, unable to move, while hearing footsteps circle my bed. The air inside the house smelled damp and rotten, no matter how much I cleaned. Then the dreams started. I kept dreaming of the basement. In the dream, I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring into darkness while something breathed directly beside my ear. I could never see it, but I knew it was smiling. Each morning, I woke with bruises on my arms. Long black fingerprints. One evening during a storm, the electricity failed completely. Rain hammered against the windows while the entire house groaned around me. I sat in the living room with only a candle for light. Then I heard it. My own voice, coming from the basement. "Help me." Every hair on my body stood up. Again. "Please, open the door." It sounded exactly like me. Not similar. Exact. I backed away slowly, but the basement hatch began trembling violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. The voice became distorted, deeper, wrong somehow. "Let me out!" The hatch burst open. A freezing smell flooded the kitchen. Not cold air. Something older. Rotten. Ancient. The darkness below looked unnatural, thicker than normal shadows. Then I saw movement inside it. Something crawling upward. Its limbs bent backward like broken joints. Its skin looked wet and stretched too tightly across its body. But the face was mine. It smiled at me from the basement stairs while its jaw slowly opened wider than humanly possible. And behind it, deeper below, I heard dozens of people breathing together. The creature spoke with my voice again. "You answered." Every light in the house exploded at once. I ran for the front door, but something grabbed my ankle halfway through the hallway. The hand felt ice-cold and impossibly thin. I kicked free and escaped into the rain barefoot. I never went back. Police searched the house the next morning after I reported an intruder. They found the basement completely empty. No creature, no footprints, nothing. But one officer later asked me a question I still cannot explain. He said, "Why is there another bed down there?" I never told them about the basement room because I never saw one. And sometimes, at exactly 2:13 a.m., my phone rings from a blocked number. When I answer, I hear breathing, wet, slow, waiting beneath something. The whispering corridors after dark. The fatal detention in the night school of Coimbra. The continuous hollow scraping of old wooden desks echoing through the dark hallways filled the empty structure with an unsettling resonance, while the faint glow of distant streetlights filtered through the tall classroom windows, revealing the grim atmosphere of a historic academy building located in the university quarter of the city of Coimbra in Portugal. My name is Arthur, a nighttime security inspector hired by the Municipal Education Board to conduct structural safety checks on these centuries-old brick facilities before the winter semester began. Checking the integrity of emergency exits and verifying lock systems constituted my mandatory professional routine during this nocturnal shift. Together with my 24-year-old assistant named Beatrice, I was inspecting the main administrative corridor when we were startled by distinct, multi-layered whispers of ancient students emanating directly from the empty lockers lining the walls. A sudden, scorching heat engulfed the entire hallway in a few seconds, releasing an overwhelming stench of sulfur that radically altered the gaseous balance of the atmosphere, burning our respiratory tracts in a violent manner. That severe thermal anomaly proved that the deserted school facility harbored the manifestation of a ruthless paranormal entity, a destructive force from the spiritual abyss that utilized the echoes of the past to torment any human intruder. This historical academy in Coimbra instantly became a chamber of intense physical torment, as these invisible entities used our complete isolation to inflict agonizing pain on the living before their final elimination. The cycle of physical torment began at the exact moment Beatrice stepped toward a vintage wooden cabinet to investigate the auditory distortion, being suddenly hoisted into the air by an irresistible magnetic pressure that erupted from the floorboards. The surrounding air converted into a superheated vortex that prevented any defensive movement or escape, while the thick leather straps of old student satchels tore themselves away from the displays to move like whips, binding the limbs of my assistant with unprecedented aggressiveness. These invisible spiritual potencies sought prolonged agony before causing demise, stretching Beatrice across the narrow hallway to shatter her bones while creating a terrifying pressure in her chest. This invisible force executed the martyrdom of my companion with staggering cruelty, breaking her joints while the intense heat shattered the window panes. The paranormal entity extended the suffering of the victim until her muscular structure collapsed entirely under the immense atmospheric force, directing then that entire corrosive thermal flow and invisible fury against my exact position in the middle of the corridor. The thermal impact generated by the vortex shattered the heavy classroom doors, causing the immediate collapse of heavy plaster arches and wooden frames upon the floor without any external mechanical movement. Without manifesting a definite anthropomorphic shape, the dark presence acted through an overwhelming atmospheric compression, piercing my skin with slate splinters projected through the air under the effect of the extreme temperature. The invisible executor controlled the density of matter perfectly to keep my body conscious while the waves of heat rose along my legs, corroding the skin tissue and paralyzing my movements. My desperate attempt to reach the main exit staircase was completely annulled by the magnetic impact. Heavy pieces of the collapsing brick walls fell due to the continuous paranormal activity, striking my chest with immense violence and fracturing my ribs, which pinned my broken body beneath the sharp debris of the ruined school hallway. An implacable suction force dragged me into the boiling core of that gaseous cloud, where the acidic vapors instantly burned my vocal cords, preventing any utterance of help or entry of oxygen into my chest. The hidden presence exerted a crushing pressure over my breastbone, forcing the definitive cessation of all my heartbeats after long minutes of terrible torment. The entire corridor architecture disintegrated under the power of the thermal collapse, burying our broken bodies beneath tons of compact dust and damp ashes. My consciousness fades away completely into the charred ruins of this cursed educational facility, consumed by the fury of these entities that erased our presence in a few moments. The dark night outside continues to shroud the silent rubble that guards its tragic history in eternal stillness. The figure waiting at the tunnel exit. I never drive through Hollow Creek Tunnel anymore. Even hearing its name makes my stomach tighten. The tunnel sits on an isolated road outside Sheffield, surrounded by dead trees and empty hills. During the day, it looks abandoned. At night, it feels wrong. Like the darkness inside, it is alive. 3 months ago, I was driving home after finishing a late shift at a warehouse. It was raining hard, and every other route was flooded, so I had no choice except to take the tunnel road. I remember checking the clock in my car. 3:07 a.m. The moment I entered the tunnel, my phone lost signal. Then the radio died. Complete silence filled the car. At first, I only noticed how cold it suddenly became. My heater was still running, but icy air spread through the vehicle. I could actually see my breath. Halfway through the tunnel, I saw someone standing near the exit. A tall figure, perfectly still. I slowed down instinctively. Something about it felt unnatural. Its body looked too thin. Its arms hung lower than they should have, and even from a distance, I could tell it was staring directly at me. I flashed my headlights. The figure didn't move. Then my radio suddenly turned back on by itself. Static exploded through the speakers. Under the static, I heard whispering, soft voices overlapping each other. "Don't stop. Keep driving. It wants you to look." My hands tightened around the wheel. The figure outside the tunnel slowly lifted its head. That's when I realized it had no face. Just darkness where its features should have been. My chest went tight with panic. I pressed harder on the accelerator. Suddenly, the lights inside the tunnel began shutting off behind me one by one. Darkness chased the car. The exit still looked far away. Too far away. The tunnel should have ended already. Then I heard a sound from the back seat. A wet breathing noise. Slow, heavy. I looked in the rearview mirror. At first I saw nothing. Then 2 pale eyes opened in the darkness behind me. I nearly crashed. Something was sitting in the back seat. Its body blended into the shadows, but its eyes reflected brightly like an animal's. Long fingers slowly curled over the headrest behind me. The whispering on the radio became louder. It came inside. I screamed and slammed the brakes. The car skidded violently across the wet road. When I turned around, the back seat was empty, but the leather seat was dented, like someone had just been sitting there. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks from the roof of the car. Bang, bang, bang. Something heavy crawled above me. Metal bent with a horrible crunching sound. I looked up just as long black fingers slid down across the windshield. The tunnel lights went out completely. Everything disappeared into darkness, except the pale eyes outside my window. They were inches from my face, watching me, smiling. A voice whispered beside my ear even though nobody was there. "You shouldn't have entered." I tried starting the car again, but the engine wouldn't respond. My breathing became uncontrollable. I could hear scratching underneath the vehicle now, like dozens of nails scraping metal. Then all the windows fogged at once. Words slowly appeared across the glass from the inside. "Look at me." I squeezed my eyes shut. The scratching stopped. The whispers stopped. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then something slammed against the driver's side door so hard the entire car shook. I opened my eyes. The thing was standing outside, tall enough that its head nearly touched the tunnel ceiling. Its face was still pure darkness, but its mouth had appeared now, stretched impossibly wide with rows of uneven teeth. It bent down slowly toward the window, and I realized the tunnel exit behind it was gone. There was only darkness, no road, no outside world, just endless black behind the creature. Then my headlights suddenly turned back on. The figure vanished instantly. The tunnel exit appeared ahead of me again. I started the engine and sped out without looking back. Police later found deep handprints pressed into the roof of my car. They said it looked like the metal had been crushed from above, but they couldn't explain the writing burned into the inside of my windshield. I cleaned it 3 times. It still comes back every night. Look at me. The rusted attic above my room. I rented the old house in Yorkshire because it was cheap and quiet. Too quiet, as I later realized. The landlord mentioned one rule before handing me the keys. Don't stay under the attic door after midnight. He said it like a joke, but his eyes didn't match his tone. The house looked normal at first. 2 floors, narrow hallway, wooden stairs that creaked with every step. My room was on the 2nd floor, directly beneath a small attic hatch in the ceiling. At night, I could hear faint metal sounds above me, like something dragging across rusted iron. The first few days, I ignored it. Old houses make noise. That's what I told myself. But on the 4th night, everything changed. Around 2:50 a.m., I woke up to a scraping sound directly above my bed. Slow, heavy, like metal being pulled across stone. Then came a soft thud. Silence. Another thud. I turned on my phone flashlight and stared at the ceiling. The attic hatch was slightly open. I knew I had closed it earlier. I climbed onto the chair and pushed it shut again. My hands were shaking for no reason I understood. That night I didn't sleep. The next morning, I noticed dust on my pillow. Dark dust, almost like rust powder. I started paying attention after that. Every night, the same pattern, scraping above my head. Then silence, then footsteps inside the attic, always barefoot, always slow, and always circling directly above my bed. I finally asked the neighbor about the house. An old man who lived across the street went quiet the moment I mentioned the attic. He told me a man had lived there decades ago, a metal worker. He used the attic as his workshop at night. People said he became obsessed with something he claimed lived inside the roof. He called it the thing that breathes through rust. Eventually, the man disappeared, but the attic never stayed silent after that. That night, I decided to record the sound. I placed my phone on the bed and turned off the lights. At 2:47 a.m., the scraping began again, but this time it was different. It was closer, much closer. Then I heard something new. Breathing, slow, wet breathing directly above me. The attic hatch started vibrating slightly, and a voice whispered through the wood, not English, not anything I recognized. But my brain understood one thing clearly. It was calling me. I froze. The breathing stopped. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then the hatch opened fully by itself. I didn't move. Something heavy dropped onto the floor above me. Then footsteps, coming down the attic stairs. Except my house didn't have attic stairs. Only a ladder behind the hatch. The sound moved slowly through the ceiling above me. Each step made the wood groan like it was breaking. Then the ceiling above my bed began to darken. A wet stain spreading outward, rust-colored. I backed into the corner of the room. The light flickered, and the hatch fell open completely. Something was hanging halfway through it. At first I thought it was a person, but then I saw the skin, or what used to be skin. It looked like metal eaten away by water. Jagged, broken, dripping black dust that fell onto my floor like ash. The head tilted toward me. No eyes. Just hollow sockets filled with slow-moving rust. Then it spoke, but not with a mouth. The sound came from inside the walls. "You kept sleeping under us." The ceiling cracked. Something long unfolded from above. Not a body. Not a creature. More like a shape made of broken metal and old bones fused together. It dragged itself down through the attic opening, scraping the edges of the wood until splinters rained onto my bed. Every movement sounded like metal screaming. I ran, down the stairs. But the house felt wrong. Longer, narrower, the hallway stretched farther than it should have. Behind me, I heard it moving faster, dragging itself across walls, across ceilings. Then I saw something impossible. Every door in the hallway was slightly open, and inside each room, I saw the same shadow sitting still, watching me. Smiling without faces, the house was no longer empty. I reached the front door and slammed it open, falling into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the street. I never went back, but the recording stayed on my phone. I played it once. There is no scraping anymore, only breathing, right next to the microphone, waiting. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear metal scraping inside my ceiling, even though I no longer live there, as if it never left the house, as if it followed me instead.